Share my bed or freeze. The Apache woman's demand to the lonely cowboy on a snowbound night. James had always been a man of the plains. From the moment he could walk, he had known a life that demanded resilience. Born into a family of cowboys, he had learned early how to ride, rope, and endure the harshness of the open land. He had grown accustomed to solitude, the endless stretches of desert and mountain, and the lonely nights spent under the vast sky filled with stars. Yet on this particular morning, as the wind howled and the clouds rolled low over the snowy plains of Arizona, James felt a chill that was different from anything he had faced before. It was not the cold of the wind that cut across his face, nor the snow that stuck to his boots. It was the realization that he might be completely alone with nowhere safe to rest for the night. The snow had come suddenly, a thick and relentless storm that turned the familiar paths of the plains into a white, unrecognizable world. James had started his journey early that day, hoping to reach the small town of Red Creek by evening. He had planned to sell a few cattle and stock up on supplies before winter fully set in. But the weather had other plans. By midday, the snow had become so heavy that the trails vanished, leaving only a uniform blanket of white. The cold seeped through his clothes, and no matter how much he tried to keep moving, he could feel it gnawing at his fingers and toes. James knew the land. He understood the dangers of snowstorms, how quickly they could trap a man, how the cold could weaken even the strongest body. He had survived many storms before, relying on his knowledge and endurance, but this one was different. It moved fast, and the wind screamed like a wild animal. The sun disappeared behind thick gray clouds, leaving the world in a dim, almost eerie light. Shadows stretched across the snow, and the familiar shapes of rocks and hills became strange and unrecognizable. Every step was difficult, each breath a sharp reminder of the winter's force. As the afternoon dragged on, James realized that he needed shelter. He had passed the old mill in the morning, but it was too far now, and he doubted it would provide safety. His mind raced, thinking of the small cabins he had seen scattered across the plains. They were few and far between, often occupied by other travelers or families, but he had no choice. If he didn't find a roof soon, the night could very well become his last. The thought tightened his chest, but it also pushed him forward. He scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of smoke, any indication of warmth and life. Hours passed, each step heavier than the last. James's hands were numb, his boots filled with snow, and his body ached from the relentless march. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and the cold seemed to seep into his very bones. He stopped to catch his breath, leaning on his saddle for support. The wind tore at his coat, and the snowflakes stung his face. He knew that if he didn't find shelter soon, hypothermia would take hold. His thoughts were interrupted by a small wisp of smoke curling in the distance. At first, he wasn't sure if it was real or just a trick of his exhausted mind, but as he squinted against the snow, he realized it was genuine. Someone was inside a cabin, and smoke rose from its chimney. A surge of hope filled him. He spurred his horse forward, though it struggled through the deep snow. The cabin grew clearer with each step, a simple wooden structure with a sloping roof, built to withstand the harsh winters of the region. James could feel warmth calling to him, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself a small smile. The thought of a fire, of a warm meal, and of dry clothes was almost too good to believe. Yet, as he approached, doubt crept in. He was a stranger in this place, and he had no idea who lived there. Would they welcome him or turn him away into the storm? Taking a deep breath, James dismounted and shook the snow from his coat. His boots sank into the deep snow as he walked toward the door, each step heavy with cold and anticipation. He knocked, the sound sharp and sudden against the quiet of the storm. The knocking echoed in the air for a moment before it was answered. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a woman standing inside. She was tall, strong, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that spoke of years surviving in a harsh land. Her dark hair framed a face that was both striking and serious. Her eyes met James's, sharp and assessing. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside roared, and the cabin offered only a narrow space of warmth and light. James realized immediately that this was not a typical household. The woman was clearly independent, someone who had learned to rely on herself in a world that demanded strength. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady and clear. There was no fear in it, only a careful caution. James, aware of how desperate he was, found himself searching for the right words. I'm caught in the storm," he admitted, his voice low, almost embarrassed by the vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "I need shelter, just for the night." The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes scanning his snow-covered coat, his frozen hands, and the tired expression on his face. She didn't answer immediately. The silence was long enough that James felt the cold creep into his bones again. Finally she spoke, her tone firm and without hesitation. "Share my bed or freeze." James blinked, startled. The words were blunt, almost shocking, but the meaning was clear. She was offering him warmth and safety, and at the same time making it clear that outside the storm there would be no survival. He swallowed hard, his pride warring with his sense of reality. He was used to fending for himself, used to enduring hardships alone, but the snow was relentless. Pride would not save him tonight. With a nod, James stepped inside, feeling the sudden rush of warmth wrap around him. The cabin smelled of smoke and wood, a comforting aroma that reminded him of simpler, safer times. He removed his wet coat and boots, setting them near the fire. The woman moved efficiently, tending to the small hearth, adding logs that crackled and popped as flames licked upward. The warmth filled the room, melting the chill from James's fingers and face. As he watched the fire, James felt a mix of relief and curiosity. The woman had not introduced herself, and yet her presence was commanding. She moved with a purpose, clearly capable of handling life on her own. He realized that the night would not just be about survival. It would be about learning from someone who had faced the same harsh land, but with skills and courage he admired. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin a small pocket of safety existed, and for the first time that day, James felt a sense of hope. The snow continued to fall, thick and relentless, blanketing the plains in white. James, sitting near the fire, realized that the night ahead would be long, but he was not alone. For a man who had spent much of his life alone, the idea of sharing this moment, of relying on someone else, even for a night, was a lesson he hadn't expected. He knew that survival often demanded humility, and tonight, that lesson had come in the form of a strong, determined woman who had opened her door to a stranger. And as the wind howled and the snow piled high outside, James understood that this night, dangerous and unpredictable as it was, would be one he would never forget. He had found shelter, warmth, and perhaps the beginning of a new understanding of trust, respect, and human connection in the most unexpected place. The fire crackled warmly, filling the small cabin with light and life as the snowstorm raged outside. James sat near the hearth, rubbing his hands together to restore circulation. The warmth was more than physical, it was almost comforting, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, safety could exist. Yet he could not ignore the presence of the woman in the cabin. She moved with calm efficiency, stacking logs and preparing a small kettle of water over the flames. Every movement seemed purposeful, as though she had done this countless times before, surviving storms, harsh winters, and the loneliness of the land with a quiet strength that James found both fascinating and intimidating. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the hiss and pop of the fire and the distant roar of the wind outside. James tried to imagine who she was, where she had come from, and how she had learned to endure so much on her own. He knew the Apache people were resilient, capable of surviving in difficult conditions, but seeing it firsthand was different. There was no story or rumor that could have prepared him for this moment. He felt both grateful and uneasy. Pride had taught him to endure alone, to rely only on himself, yet here he was, entirely dependent on a stranger's kindness to survive the night. Finally, she spoke, her voice breaking the silence. "You're lucky I was home," she said, her eyes steady on him. "The snow came faster than expected. If you had been outside for another hour, I'm not sure you'd have made it." James swallowed hard, feeling a mix of humility and embarrassment. I didn't think it would be this bad," he admitted. "I've faced storms before, but this one caught me off guard." She gave a small nod as if she understood, though there was no pity in her tone. The plains can be cruel. Even someone who knows them well can be surprised. Her words carried authority, but also a subtle warning. He sensed that she had learned the hard way that survival demanded respect for nature and readiness for anything. James shifted closer to the fire, warming his fingers and feeling the numbness slowly fade. He had expected discomfort and cold, but what he did not expect was the quiet tension that came with sharing this space with someone so independent and unyielding. He realized that trust would not be given freely here. It would have to be earned. And yet he was acutely aware that his life depended on her acceptance for the night. After a few minutes, she gestured toward a simple wooden bench near the wall. "Sit," she said. "We'll need to eat something. You can't survive the cold on an empty stomach." James hesitated, then moved to the bench. She handed him a small bowl of stew, thick with chunks of vegetables and meat. The aroma was rich, filling the cabin with warmth that seemed to seep into his very bones. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, grateful for the nourishment and the safety it represented. While he ate, he watched her move about the cabin, lighting a few candles, checking the fire, and occasionally glancing out the window to monitor the storm. Her confidence was striking, a clear reflection of years surviving on her own. Once they had eaten, she motioned toward the bed. "It's small," she said, "but it will keep you warm. No sense freezing when you can share it." James hesitated, pride flaring for a brief moment. He had spent much of his life alone, and the idea of sharing space with someone else, even out of necessity, felt strange. Yet he knew better than to argue. The snowstorm was relentless, and hypothermia was a very real threat. With a nod, he moved toward the bed, careful not to intrude but aware that his life depended on this decision. As they settled in, the warmth of the fire and the thick blankets provided a comforting cocoon against the storm. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional crackle of the fire and the muffled roar of the wind outside. James found himself studying the woman, her strong features, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the way she seemed completely at ease even in the midst of the storm. He realized that she was not only surviving but thriving in conditions that would challenge most men. There was a quiet dignity in her independence, and he felt a mixture of admiration and respect. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of letting up. The two of them remained close but silent, each respecting the other's space while understanding the unspoken need for warmth and survival. Slowly, James began to feel more comfortable. He asked questions about her life, the land, and how she managed to endure so many winters alone. At first, her answers were brief, measured, but as he listened attentively, she began to share more. She told him stories of the plains, of survival and cleverness, of times when the land had been both a harsh master and a generous provider. She spoke of lessons learned from elders, from nature itself, and from the mistakes she had made along the way. James listened intently, realizing that every story was a lesson, every word a fragment of wisdom earned through experience. He thought about his own life, about the pride and independence that had defined him, and he began to understand that survival was not just about strength. It was about learning, adapting, and sometimes accepting help when it was offered. The night grew deeper, and the storm outside intensified. The wind howled like a living creature, rattling the cabin walls and blowing snow against the windows. Yet inside, there was a growing sense of connection, a quiet bond formed through shared necessity and mutual respect. James realized that the woman's bold words earlier, "share my bed or freeze," were not just about survival. They were a statement of truth, a lesson in humility and the importance of human connection. He had come to the cabin as a proud, solitary cowboy, confident in his ability to endure alone. Now, he understood that even the strongest needed others at times, and that accepting help was not weakness, but wisdom. As the night wore on, they shared more stories. James told her about his childhood on the plains, about the long hours of riding and tending cattle, about the loneliness that came with a life spent in open spaces. She listened carefully, asking questions when appropriate, her curiosity genuine but respectful. In return, she shared tales of her own experiences, hunting and tracking, surviving blizzards and learning to read the land in ways James had never considered. Each story was a window into a life shaped by resilience, intelligence, and courage. Despite the cold and the storm, James began to feel a sense of peace. There was no danger here, no immediate threat, only the warmth of fire, blankets, and the shared understanding between two people who had survived much. He realized that this night, though forced upon him by circumstance, was teaching him more than any previous winter or storm ever had. It was teaching him humility, respect, and the quiet strength of a person who faced life head-on without complaint. Hours slipped by unnoticed until finally, the storm outside began to soften. The wind's roar was still present, but the snow no longer fell with the same relentless force. James felt a sense of relief, knowing that the worst was over. Yet he also knew that the lessons of this night would remain with him, long after the snow melted. He had entered the cabin as a solitary cowboy, cautious and proud, but he would leave with a deeper understanding of trust, survival, and the strength found in accepting help when it was needed. As he drifted toward a light sleep, James reflected on the unexpected encounter. The woman had shown him that courage was not always loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, and capable of enduring even the harshest storms. He realized that the world could be unforgiving, but that in moments of need, human kindness and strength could shine through, illuminating even the coldest, darkest night. By the time James closed his eyes, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm had forced him to confront his limits, his pride, and his assumptions about life and survival. And in the warmth of the cabin, beside the woman who had saved him, he discovered not only safety but a new perspective, a deeper understanding of the land, of resilience, and of the bonds that could form even in the most unexpected circumstances. The night was long, the snow relentless, but James knew that he had endured, and he had learned something far more important than mere survival. He had learned about trust, humility, and the quiet courage of a person who had mastered life's challenges with wisdom and strength. And as the storm raged on outside, the cabin remained a small sanctuary, a place where two strangers shared warmth, safety, and the knowledge that even in the harshest conditions, human connection could endure. The storm outside had quieted to a soft, steady snowfall blanketing the plains in white silence. Inside the cabin, the fire's warmth was a comforting contrast to the cold that still lingered just beyond the walls. James sat near the hearth, watching the flames dance, feeling a sense of calm he had not known in years. Yet, the night was far from over. Despite the physical comfort, he sensed a shift in the air, a subtle moment that promised lessons beyond mere survival. Aon, the Apache woman, moved around the cabin with the same steady purpose she had all evening. She checked the fire, tended the small kettle, and adjusted the blankets on the bed. James watched her, noticing details he had overlooked before, The careful way she arranged the logs, the precision in her movements, and the quiet determination in her eyes. It was clear she had lived a life that demanded constant attention to detail, a life in which mistakes could be dangerous or even deadly. Her presence was commanding, not because she demanded it, but because she embodied competence, confidence, and strength. After a long silence, Aeon spoke, her voice calm but carrying a quiet authority. "The plains are not kind to those who underestimate them," she said. "You may think you know them, but a single storm can change everything." James nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had always considered himself knowledgeable, capable of surviving alone, yet the storm had reminded him that nature was unpredictable. He realized that relying solely on his own strength and pride could be dangerous. Survival required flexibility, humility, and sometimes the wisdom of others who had endured challenges he had not. "I've learned that lesson tonight," James admitted. "I thought I could handle the storm myself, but I would not have made it without you." His voice was steady, sincere, lacking the usual pride he carried. Aeon gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. "It is not weakness to accept help," she said. "It is wisdom. Even the strongest can be unprepared. Knowing when to rely on others is part of survival." Her words struck James deeply. He had always equated independence with strength, believing that needing anyone else was a flaw. Yet here, in the warmth of the cabin, he realized that true strength was a balance of skill, courage, and the willingness to accept aid when necessary. The fire crackled, and James felt a moment of vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to experience. For a man who had spent years alone on the plains, who had faced blizzards, hunger, and isolation, this night was teaching lessons beyond the physical. It was a lesson in trust, respect, and human connection. The woman before him, with her quiet authority and sharp intelligence, had opened his eyes to something he had not considered. That survival was as much about wisdom and cooperation as it was about courage and endurance. As the night progressed, Aeon shared more of her experiences. She spoke of hunting in harsh winters, tracking animals across snow-covered plains, and finding shelter in the most unforgiving landscapes. Her stories were practical, filled with tips and strategies, but they also carried subtle life lessons. She spoke of patience, observation, and adaptability, emphasizing that the land rewarded those who respected it and punished those who did not. James listened intently, absorbing not only the survival advice, but also the deeper wisdom hidden within her words. At one point, she reached for a small bundle of herbs and spices, explaining how they could be used to preserve food and boost energy in extreme conditions. She offered James a taste, and he marveled at the flavors, realizing that survival was not merely enduring, but also understanding the land and its resources. Every lesson she shared was a fragment of knowledge honed through experience, and James felt grateful that fate had led him to her cabin. The night grew colder, and the shadows from the fire flickered against the walls. James noticed that the initial tension between them had softened. While the situation was still serious, they were trapped by the storm. The atmosphere had shifted from caution to quiet companionship. He realized that trust was forming, not through words alone, but through shared experience and mutual respect. The simple act of surviving together had created a bond that neither could ignore. Aeon, sensing the change, began to ask James about his life on the plains. She asked about his daily routines, the challenges of ranch work, and the lessons he had learned from years of solitude. James spoke openly, recounting stories of long rides, cattle drives, and nights spent under the stars. He shared the loneliness he had felt, the quiet moments of reflection, and the pride he took in his independence. Aeon listened carefully, occasionally offering insight or a question that revealed her own understanding of life's challenges. Through this exchange, James realized that while their lives had been different, the essence of survival was the same. Both had endured hardship, relied on skill and intelligence, and learned the importance of respect for the land, for nature, and for those around them. The storm had brought them together, but it was their shared resilience that allowed a connection to form. He felt a sense of admiration for her strength and a growing recognition that his own life had been enriched by this encounter. Hours passed and the fire burned low, casting a warm glow across the cabin. James felt a mixture of exhaustion and contentment. He was no longer merely surviving. He was learning, growing, and gaining insight into a life he had only glimpsed before. Aeon's presence was a constant reminder that true strength was more than physical endurance. It was knowledge, wisdom, and the courage to face challenges with clarity and focus. At one point, the wind outside intensified again, rattling the cabin and sending a fresh layer of snow against the windows. James instinctively reached for the blankets, feeling the chill in the air. Aeon noticed and adjusted them, ensuring that both of them remained warm. "The storm will not last forever," she said, "but you must be prepared for the land's unpredictability. Learn to respect it, or it will teach you harshly." Her words lingered in James's mind. He thought about his life on the plains, about the times he had underestimated nature, and about the pride that had sometimes blinded him to reality. He realized that every mistake had been a lesson, every challenge an opportunity to grow. And now, in the quiet of this cabin, with the storm outside and the warmth of the fire, he understood that learning from others was just as important as learning from experience. The night moved toward its deepest hours, and both James and Aeon settled closer to the fire. The initial awkwardness had faded, replaced by a sense of mutual understanding and respect. They shared silence, stories, and the occasional practical tip, each recognizing the value of the other's presence. James felt a rare sense of peace, knowing that he was not alone in facing the challenges of the world. He had come to the cabin a proud, solitary cowboy, but he would leave with a new perspective on life, resilience, and human connection. As the fire crackled and the shadows danced across the cabin walls, James reflected on the events of the evening. The storm had forced him to confront his pride, his assumptions, and his understanding of survival. He had learned that independence did not mean isolation, that strength was not measured solely by endurance, and that wisdom often came from recognizing the value of others' experience. Aeon had taught him not just how to survive the storm, but how to approach life with humility, respect, and an open mind. By the time the night began to wane, James felt a profound sense of gratitude. The cabin, the fire, and the woman who had opened her door had offered more than shelter. They had offered knowledge, perspective, and a rare opportunity for growth. He realized that life's challenges were not always to be faced alone, and that the bonds formed in moments of need could be both practical and meaningful. The snow outside continued to fall softly, creating a serene landscape that contrasted with the intensity of the storm earlier. James felt ready for whatever lay ahead, carrying with him the lessons of the night: courage, humility, trust, and the understanding that survival was a combination of skill, knowledge, and cooperation. He knew that this experience would stay with him forever, shaping the way he approached both the land and the people he encountered along the way. As he finally allowed himself to rest, the warmth of the fire and the blankets comforting him, James knew that the night had been a turning point. It was not merely a matter of surviving a snowstorm. It was a moment of growth, reflection, and connection that would leave an indelible mark on his life. And while the storm would eventually pass and the plains would return to their familiar challenges, James felt prepared, wiser, and more appreciative of the strength and courage found in those who endure life's hardships with skill and dignity. The night slowly gave way to early morning, but the snowstorm had not fully relented. Outside, the world was a soft, endless white, with drifts piling high against the cabin walls and the landscape smoothed into gentle, frozen curves. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the thick blankets had made the night bearable, but the morning brought a new set of challenges. James awoke to the sound of a gentle wind rattling the cabin door and the muffled groan of snow settling on the roof. He stretched, stiff from the night, and realized that surviving the storm would require more than warmth. It would require careful planning and cooperation. Aeon was already awake, tending to the fire with practiced efficiency. Her movements were quiet but precise, each action deliberate. She added fresh logs to the flames, stirred the kettle of water on the hearth, and inspected the small provisions they had for the day. James watched her for a moment, appreciating the way she managed every detail of survival without hesitation. She had lived her life with the kind of self-reliance that few could match, but she had also learned to anticipate challenges before they became emergencies. Watching her work was a lesson in itself. "Morning," James said quietly, careful not to disturb the calm that filled the cabin. Aeon looked up and nodded. "The storm has softened, but the snow is still deep. It will take time to move safely." Her tone was practical, but there was a hint of encouragement. "We will need to clear a path if you plan to continue on your journey." James nodded, understanding the truth in her words. The storm had not only trapped him for the night, but had transformed the familiar plains into a treacherous landscape. Even someone as experienced as he could not navigate it alone without risk. He realized that his survival depended not only on his own skill, but also on the wisdom and guidance of Aeon. They moved through the cabin, gathering what supplies they could: dried meat, bread, and small amounts of water. Aeon showed him how to ration food to preserve energy and maintain warmth. She explained that sudden exertion could be dangerous in freezing temperatures, as it drained the body quickly and increased the risk of hypothermia. James listened carefully, absorbing every detail, knowing that each instruction could mean the difference between life and death. Once their preparations were complete, they stepped outside together. The snow was still deep, and the wind carried a sharp edge that made every breath a challenge. James marveled at Aeon's ease in the environment. She moved with confidence, stepping carefully and choosing paths that minimized risk. Every motion was deliberate, a reflection of her understanding of the land and her experience surviving in it. James felt a mix of admiration and humility. He realized that while he had spent his life riding the plains, he had much to learn from her knowledge and instincts. "Follow my lead," she said. "The snow can hide danger. Every step must be measured." James nodded and followed closely, careful not to stray. Together, they made their way through the drifts, testing the ground with their boots and avoiding weak patches where hidden rocks or ice could cause injury. The journey was slow, each step a deliberate effort, but progress was steady. James felt a growing respect for Aeon's skills and her ability to navigate such difficult terrain with confidence. As they moved, Aeon spoke about her experiences during past storms. She described nights spent trapped in similar conditions, learning to preserve warmth, manage energy, and maintain hope. Her stories were practical, but also filled with resilience and determination. James realized that these accounts were more than survival tips. They were lessons in patience, courage, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. He listened closely, knowing that each word could guide him through both the snow and the challenges of life itself. Hours passed, and the physical exertion of moving through deep snow began to take its toll. James felt fatigue in his legs and back, but Aeon's steady presence kept him focused. She offered encouragement when needed, reminders to pace himself, and guidance on maintaining balance and conserving energy. He realized that their partnership, though formed out of necessity, had become a true collaboration. Together, they navigated the dangerous terrain, relying on each other's skills to move safely. At one point, they reached a small hill where the snow had drifted particularly high. James struggled to climb, his boots sinking into the powder with each step. He felt the frustration and fear that came with the effort, realizing how easily one misstep could lead to injury or exhaustion. Aeon extended her hand without hesitation, helping him steady himself and guiding him up the slope. In that moment, James understood the depth of trust that had developed between them. Survival was not a solo endeavor. It was built on cooperation, awareness, and mutual support. Once they reached a small clearing beyond the hill, Aeon paused to assess their path forward. The wind had died down somewhat, revealing a landscape transformed by the storm. Snow covered everything in a smooth, uninterrupted blanket, hiding familiar landmarks and creating new hazards. James felt a mixture of awe and respect for the power of nature. He realized that even the most experienced traveler could be humbled by forces beyond control. "We are not far from the main trail," Aeon said, "but you must remain cautious. Snow can hide obstacles that may cause injury or delay." James nodded, grateful for her guidance. He realized that the night in the cabin had been only the first stage of survival. The storm still presented real challenges that required careful attention. But he felt prepared now, bolstered by the lessons he had learned, the strength of their partnership, and the trust that had grown between them. As they moved on, James reflected on how much the night had changed him. He had arrived at the cabin a proud, solitary cowboy, confident in his independence, but unaware of the limits of his knowledge and endurance. Aeon had shown him that survival was not only about strength, but about intelligence, adaptability, and respect for both nature and others. He realized that every challenge he faced in the past had taught him something, but tonight the lessons were sharper, more immediate, and more profound. By midday, they had reached a point where the snow was less deep and the path more discernible. James felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering respect for the storm's power. He understood that even though the worst had passed, the landscape was still dangerous, and vigilance was essential. Aeon's calm presence reminded him of the importance of experience, foresight, and preparation in surviving not just the snow but life itself. They paused briefly near a small stream, partially frozen but flowing enough to provide water. Aeon demonstrated how to test the ice, break it safely, and gather water without risking an accident. James followed her instructions carefully, impressed by the simple yet essential skills she demonstrated. He realized that survival required more than brute strength. It required observation, intelligence, and careful action. As they prepared to continue, Aeon spoke of the value of learning from others. "You have the courage to face challenges alone," she said. "But wisdom comes from knowing when to seek guidance. We all survive better together than apart." James nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The night in the cabin had been a turning point, but the day's journey reinforced the lessons: cooperation, trust, humility, and the recognition that survival was a shared responsibility. He realized that strength was amplified when combined with knowledge and collaboration, and that true independence included the wisdom to accept help when needed. By late afternoon, they finally reached a familiar trail partially cleared by previous travelers. The snow was still thick, but it was navigable. James felt a deep sense of gratitude toward Aeon for guiding him safely through the storm's challenges. He understood that without her expertise, he might have been trapped longer, or worse, injured or lost in the snow. The experience had shown him the value of human connection and the importance of mutual respect in life-threatening situations. As they approached the trail, Aeon paused and looked at James with a quiet intensity. "You have learned much tonight," she said. "Remember these lessons. Respect the land, respect the storm, and respect those who help you. Survival is never only about strength, it is about wisdom and cooperation." James felt a profound sense of understanding and gratitude. The night and the day's journey had transformed him, shaping not only his knowledge of survival, but also his perspective on life. He realized that the world was unpredictable and often harsh, but that human connection, trust, and respect could make even the most difficult challenges manageable. As they parted ways near the trail, James felt a mixture of relief, respect, and admiration. The storm had tested him physically and mentally, but it had also provided lessons that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He knew that he would never forget the night in the cabin, the guidance of Aeon, or the importance of trust, cooperation, and wisdom in facing the challenges of both nature and life itself. The storm had finally passed. When James woke that morning, the world outside the cabin was calm and serene. Snow covered the plains in a thick, unbroken white blanket. The trees were outlined with frost, and the sun cast a soft, pale light over the frozen land. The wind had died down, leaving a peaceful silence that contrasted sharply with the fierce storm of the previous night. James felt a quiet awe as he stepped outside, taking in the transformed landscape. The plains that had seemed dangerous and unpredictable now looked almost magical, as if the snow had erased all hardships and left only beauty. Inside the cabin, Aeon moved with her usual precision, tending the fire and preparing a simple breakfast. The smell of warming bread and boiling water filled the small space, comforting James after a long, difficult night. He realized how much he had relied on her guidance and strength over the past 24 hours. Without her, he might have remained trapped, exhausted, or even injured in the deep snow. Her knowledge and calm confidence had been a lifeline, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. As he ate quietly, James reflected on everything that had happened. The night in the cabin, the lessons from the storm, and the journey through the snow had changed him. He had come to the plains that morning as a proud, solitary cowboy, confident in his abilities and accustomed to handling challenges alone. By the time he awoke to the calm morning, he understood that pride alone was not enough to survive the harshness of the land. Strength was important, but wisdom, humility, and trust in others could make the difference between life and death. Aeon looked at him carefully over the rim of her cup. "You learned much last night and today," she said. "The storm was severe, but you adapted. You listened and acted. That is what survival requires: observation, patience, and the ability to accept guidance when needed." James nodded. "I have," he admitted. "I realize now that being independent does not mean facing everything alone. Strength alone isn't enough. The land can humble anyone." She smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement of his understanding. "The land will test every traveler," she said. "It is patient but unforgiving. The snow may be beautiful now, but it is not to be underestimated. Respect it, and it will allow you to pass safely. Ignore it, and it will remind you of its power." After breakfast, they prepared for James's departure. He packed his gear carefully, making sure nothing essential was left behind. Aeon checked the trail outside, testing the snow and identifying safe paths. Her careful attention reassured him. He knew that leaving the cabin without her guidance would have been much more dangerous. Together, they mapped the safest way for him to return to the main road and continue his journey. As they stepped outside, the sun warmed their faces, and the snow sparkled under its light. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine and frozen earth. James felt a sense of renewal, a quiet energy that came from surviving a challenge and learning from it. He realized that the storm, though dangerous, had been a gift in disguise. It had forced him to confront his limits, rely on another person's experience, and reflect on the values that truly mattered in life: courage, humility, respect, and trust. "Follow this path for a short distance," Aeon instructed, pointing toward a trail that cut through the snow. "It will take you back to the main route. You will be safe from the hazards of deep snow, but continue to be careful. The land changes quickly." James followed her directions carefully, moving step by step through the snow. Each motion reminded him of her earlier guidance: the lessons in pacing, testing the ground and observing subtle signs in the environment. He realized that every detail she had taught him was now part of his understanding, and he felt a growing confidence that he could handle the remainder of his journey safely. Before parting, Aeon spoke again, her voice steady but carrying a hint of warmth. Remember what you learned here. Independence is important, but wisdom is stronger. Respect the land, respect its dangers, and respect those who help you. You will encounter storms again, in snow or in life. Use what you have learned to guide yourself. James felt a lump in his throat. He had faced countless challenges in his life, but the clarity and depth of her words struck him deeply. They were not just about surviving a snowstorm, they were lessons for life itself. He realized that his encounter with Aeon had given him knowledge and perspective that he would carry forever. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You saved my life, and you taught me more than I can express. I will never forget this night or everything you have shared." Aeon nodded, her gaze firm but not unkind. "Go safely," she said. "And remember, survival is not only about enduring alone. It is about learning, adapting, and recognizing the value of others when needed. Take that with you and you will thrive." With a final nod, James began to follow the trail Aeon had indicated. Each step through the snow was easier now, guided by her instructions and the knowledge he had absorbed. He noticed how much more alert he was, how carefully he assessed the snow and terrain, and how confidently he moved compared to the day before. The lessons of the storm and the cabin had become part of him, shaping his awareness, patience, and respect for the land. As he walked, he reflected on the night's events. He remembered the initial fear and hesitation when he approached the cabin. He recalled the bold words Aeon had spoken, "Share my bed or freeze," and how those words had initially startled him. Now he understood their full meaning. They were not just a demand for survival. They were a lesson in humility, courage, and the importance of human connection. He realized that his life, though spent largely alone, had been enriched by the encounter. The storm had tested him, but it had also taught him to value guidance, cooperation, and respect for those who knew more than he did. Hours passed as he continued along the trail. The snow, though still deep in places, was manageable, and the sun grew higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the plains. James thought about the landscape, transformed by the storm, and marveled at its beauty and danger. The plains were vast, unpredictable, and often unforgiving, yet they were also full of life, lessons, and opportunities for growth. He understood now that every challenge faced in these lands, every storm, every harsh night, was part of a larger lesson, teaching endurance, respect, and the importance of humility. By late afternoon, James reached a familiar landmark, the edge of a forest that marked the beginning of the main trail back to the town. Relief washed over him, but it was accompanied by a quiet reflection on what he had experienced. He realized that the storm, the cabin, and Aeon's guidance had given him more than physical survival. They had given him wisdom, perspective, and a renewed appreciation for the power of human connection. He paused at the edge of the forest, looking back toward the cabin that had sheltered him. Smoke still curled faintly from the chimney, a reminder of the warmth and care that had saved him. He thought about Aeon, her strength, her knowledge, and the lessons she had shared. Gratitude filled him, along with a sense of humility. He understood that life was not only about facing challenges alone, but also about learning from others and respecting the wisdom that experience brings. James continued along the trail, each step carrying him closer to civilization and safety, but also carrying the lessons of the night and day with him. He felt stronger, wiser, and more aware of the delicate balance between pride, independence, and the value of guidance. The storm had tested him physically and mentally, but it had also offered an opportunity for growth that he would never forget. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the snow-covered plains, James thought about the journey ahead. He knew that more challenges would come, but he felt prepared, confident not only in his skills but also in his understanding of life's lessons. The experience with Aeon had shown him that true strength was not measured solely by endurance or pride, but by wisdom, respect, and the courage to accept guidance when needed. By the time James reached the town, the sky was painted with shades of pink and gold, reflecting the calm after the storm. He rode slowly through the streets, taking in the familiar sights with a renewed sense of gratitude and awareness. Life would continue, with its challenges and uncertainties, but he carried with him the memory of a night in a snowbound cabin, a woman who had demanded both honesty and cooperation, and the lessons that would shape him for the rest of his life. As he dismounted and secured his horse, James smiled to himself. The storm had been severe, the snow treacherous, and the night long, but he had survived. More importantly, he had learned lessons that went beyond survival, lessons about trust, humility, respect, and the power of human connection. And though he would continue to travel the plains, face storms, and endure hardship, he knew that the experience would remain with him forever, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, guidance, wisdom, and cooperation could transform danger into growth, fear into respect, and isolation into understanding. The night in the cabin, Aeon's guidance, and the storm's test had left a mark on James that no time, distance, or experience could erase. He had been humbled, challenged, and taught, and in return, he had gained a deeper understanding of the world, of survival, and of the quiet strength found in those who endure life with courage, knowledge, and wisdom.